Grow CFO is where finance leaders grow together. Join thousands of like-minded professionals using Grow CFO to access the combined knowledge and experience of the finance leader community. You can join us today at growcfo.net. Hello and welcome to the Grow CFO show. I'm your host, Kevin Appleby, and today I've got a special guest with me, Baz Bedrossian. Hello, Baz. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Kevin. Delighted to be here.
So, Baz, tell me a little bit about you. I know you're an experienced CFO, but tell me a little bit more.
Right. Where do I start? I mean, I think the best way of describing, where I've been and what I've done is sort of in very shortly, in summary form, is in three parts. First part of my career, the early years, as I call them, it's a bit unorthodox because I went through the usual, got the accountancy degree and then joined a firm of small partners, small partner firm, and in Richmond upon Thames, and couldn't pass all my PE1s and PE2s together in those days of childhood.
I remember those PE1s and PE2s. As I've said on this podcast before, I'm still expecting a letter from the Institute Chart.
I've heard you say that.
You've failed your PE2.
I've heard you say that on previous shows, and I do smirk at it because I have similar recollections. But anyway, so went through that process after 3-4 years, got what was called in those days as time barred. It sounds quite a radical statement, but it basically means you can't pass your exams all at once. Yeah. Decided to move on. However, having gained real good experience of businesses and how they tick, having audited them for 4 years. Then I joined a company in the sort of promotional products industry, which went through a number of takeovers and acquisitions. And that's where I really got my grounding. So my sort of middle years, my second stage. I had no inclination of going back and studying, but a few years back, like 22 years ago, when my wife turned around and said, "I'm pregnant again," it made me think twice about going back and doing the more flexible ACCA qualification, which I successfully did because I had some exemptions as well, and duly qualified, and my things seemed to change overnight.
But don't you think some of it makes a lot more sense at the stage where you've actually done a lot of stuff in practice? When you do P1 and P2, it's not long after you graduated. It's all theory.
Yes,
you've done some audit, but that's about it.
Absolutely. And what was great during my 14 years at the promotion products company is I saw a lot of change, a lot of business transformation, a lot of technology coming on board to help with processes that were previously done manually. Even we're using Kalamazoo books in the early days.
I remember those. Yes, I've got memories of going on qualified in a similar small firm to yourself, Baz, and I've got memories of those jobs where you went out and you prepared the account, you did the audit, and you did the tax.
Right, that's right.
All at the same time. And
there was always that fine line, wasn't there? Yes. There was always that fine line between, well, can you actually do the audit if you've done some of the accounts as well? Well, we've got a different team doing that, and we got by, and it was a great time, Kevin. I really enjoyed it. And then I would say sort of the third stage was, getting to a certain age where thinking you've got itchy feet about being an FD or a CFO, and I parted company with the organisation, having spent many glorious years there, and went on to my first CFO role, FD role at the time. And then it's like a number 9 bus. I moved once, and then I seem to have moved every few years since then. And that's been the sort of the growth in my profile in the sort of what I would call the sort of exec years.
Yeah, in those exec years, you've worked with some reasonable sized organisations, Baz.
Yes, I have. My most recent role, which I left in December, was probably the biggest role. Happy to name the company, Sodexo. It's on my LinkedIn profile. And it was 2 years of, business transformation and lots of stuff, technology, and making some real good friends out of colleagues that I've left behind. But so I've had a number of CFO roles, one commercial director role, and throughout the whole process, loved every minute of it. with the ups and downs that go along with the
there are always ups and downs, and if it was all sun is shining, it would be a bit of a boring world. It's actually some of those downs that make it interesting sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But I guess looking at the companies that you work for and the roles you've been in, Baz, it strikes me that kind of your thing is business turnaround. Is that right?
Business turnaround, financial turnaround. Yes, it does. I think sometimes, Kevin, that it's very rare that you walk into a role, CFO or finance, strategic finance based, where everything's ticking along hunky-dory and there's nothing to do. Usually those roles either don't exist or people don't vacate them. And especially in the current market over the last few years, especially in the last 12 months, I think there's a lot of business transformation, going on. And yeah, I would say that my skill set is more akin to going in, sorting out stuff, getting the right people in place, and being able to support the business, add value with the executive team, obviously, being in tow.
Baz, you're walking into a new organization and you've probably got some inkling that your role that you've been recruited to do is to solve a particular set of problems. So your experience, where do you start? You've arrived on day one, what happens next?
Yes, very good question. That's a question that probably has 100 answers. My view of it is the first thing to do is the absolute must. Do very little. Actually understand the business, understand the team that you're going to be working with, understand the strategic vision of the organization and be able to come to some conclusions. Independent conclusions, I think, is important, and really get to understand the nitty-gritty side of what makes people in the business tick.
So yeah, you're coming in. I'd agree with that, and do very little. And your remit is probably talking to people, finding out as much as possible. And I guess you've got, as the new guy, you've got a honeymoon period, but you've been brought in to do something specific, so you can't get away with doing very little for too long. So how long do you think that honeymoon period tends to last, Baz?
I would say most of my recent roles do very little for a very little amount of time. But you're absolutely right. When I say do very little, it absolutely means to understand the business, and to talk to people, talk to the stakeholders, talk to the senior management team, talk to middle managers, understand what their view is of the business, what makes it tick, what makes them tick, and most importantly is try and in terms of the first action point, I would say, is try and build or look at the team that's currently in place and view their finance capabilities. I think that's the number one objective in terms of people would be to ensure that you've got the right people in place for teams, and that's not an easy task, because sometimes you do have the right team in place, and sometimes you have to make small tweaks. Sometimes you may need to make wholesale changes. I've been very fortunate that in most of my sort of senior exec roles, I've had the right team in place, made some tweaks, and actually sometimes you can have the right team in place. But I heard a comment the other day through one of the seminars I was on where get the right people on the bus. Well, I've always had the right people on the bus, more than most, but changing some seats, that makes sense.
Say, are they necessarily sitting in the right seats?
Right seats,
that would be one of the things I'd think about is finding out what people want to do, what makes them tick. Have you actually aligned these people with their strengths, or are you getting them to do things that they might be a bit weak at? You're never going to train them to do anything different, so find somebody else to do that bit.
Absolutely. And I've been very fortunate to have relatively good, strong finance teams, finance leaders as well in my team. And one thing I've learned throughout my career in terms of people is treat people how you'd want to be treated. probably one of the things I learned in the early years of auditing. I had a very shrewd partner that taught me that phrase, and it's always stuck with me throughout my 25, 30 years of career building.
It's funny that I certainly find myself in a lot of situations where I'm thinking back across a career, and I tend to think, oh, what would so-and-so have done in this position? And there's kind of 3 or 4 people like that I really respect from giving advice, having worked with in the past, and I kind of try to become them in certain circumstances. Yeah. But okay, so you've got the right finance team, Baz, but you've still got problems to sort out.
Yeah.
Where are we going with sorting the problems out? What tends to be your approach to that?
I think in terms of the transformation activity, you've got to make sure that you've got the right resource in place and the right skills in place to ensure that the BAU side of the business is still, working as effectively and efficiently as possible in light of the circumstances. And that needs a degree of attention in terms of making sure that the bills are getting paid, cash is coming in, everything's working in order in terms of the prime books of entry, and that you're compliant with the obviously auditing requirements and so on. Transformation exercises can take, I've been involved where they can take anything up to from 3 months to 2 years, depending on the company size, and ensure that you've got the right skills in place and actually the right, we call it Chinese walls in the audit world, obviously, the right people in place to do the transformation stuff, which I think sometimes companies don't necessarily realize that to muddle that up with the BAU activity can actually put the project back quite a bit. Sometimes it's a necessity because of the lack of resources. But I think that's where I've read, again, an ACCA article the other day, 75% of transformation projects either don't meet the right deadline or do not come in on budget because there's the muddying of the lines between BAU and the transformation activity. So that's a really good lesson.
I've seen that on consulting projects and finance transformations and so on over the years, that getting a hold of the right people for the right amount of time to contribute to the project is always an issue. I don't know about you, Baz, but I've got a view that says if you've really got a transformation to do, put your best people on the transformation project and free all their time up and backfill those people in their day roles, rather than bring in people that don't know the business to do the transformation. I don't know if that rings true with you or not.
It does, and on one project it absolutely did, and it worked. There was a transformation project basically included the implementation of a new finance system. That was followed by the implementation of the new HR system. That was followed by the implementation of the new project management system. It was a number of years ago, and it was relatively a small company, but the processes are still the same. You've got to get the right team in place to do to work on the transformation. And we actually got a couple of interims in to help with the BAU activity. And the project lasted actually around 6 months, and we did deliver it, on time in full. And it helped with forming our future strategy going forward. So you're absolutely right. And then I've been involved in a bigger transformation project where, that you do sometimes use the skill set of, external resources, including some of the, consultancy arms of big audit firms to help with, some of the project activity, because obviously they're quite big.
Yeah. And certainly that's the sort of stuff that I've been doing as bread and butter for the last 20 years. And Yeah, and some of the things you end up doing, I think it's right to bring in consultants to do some things, because if we do it as consultants day in and day out, we have a certain expertise. If your people are doing the same thing, you're not likely to they're not likely to have done it before. You've got to train them up from scratch and so on. So it is efficient in some ways, but I definitely believe very much in joint consultant client teams that are working together. I'd always say, as consultants, you do it with the organization, you never do it to the organization.
Absolutely. And actually, in the instance where I described, the 6-month transformation plan, the consultant actually stayed a partner of the business on and off for a number of years. And that obviously is very conducive to the strategic vision of the business in terms of moving forward, because they've been involved with you during a process where there's been a lot of change, and they've enjoyed that process with you, enjoyed, whichever way you look at it. And you're absolutely right. They learn, they do learn. And let's be honest, we both work with large-scale consultants who, some from the Big Four, where they've seen this a number of times, so they are experts in what they're doing.
And quite often, you come in to solve problem A. And once you get solving problem A, you work out actually problem A isn't the real problem, it's problem B. And you need to sort of project out how to put that right. And the number, I always joke and say that the project brief that you start with on day one is never the project you end up delivering.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, I go back to that project I described. We didn't know at the time that we were going to update the project management side of the business as well. Which we're still working off, Excel spreadsheets and Word documents and so on, in terms of process and how to do things. And we, the finance system was actually the easy win. We put a new finance system in there, but then there was a lot of project work that the company had, needed to basically automate. And the company that we got the finance system through, they said, well, you do know we have got a clean suite of items that lead to an ERP system. We didn't quite go for the ERP, the company was too small, but certainly once we put the HR system in place and the payroll, which we outsourced, which worked hand in hand with the HR system, feeding through all the journals at the end of the month to the account system. And then bolted on the project management system after what you said just now, which sometimes it's identifying problem B that's the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So Baz, that's sort of in the financial systems angle of this, but what's your experience of that necessary transformation? I mean, to be genuine business turnaround, the business is losing a stack of money and you've got to do something pretty dramatic, pretty quick to save things. That's a situation you've been in as well?
Yes. Recall a business where I've gone in and done the bit at the beginning that we described in terms of having the right team in place and seeing what needs to be done, and I call it lifting the bonnet and having a look what needs to be done and seeing a few leaks. Indeed. They're everywhere, and sorting out the mess. And I think what you've got to be careful of is trying not to do too much too quickly, and having a good plan is absolutely essential. Good project plan, and the business was actually going through huge change, including looking at whether or not the location was correct in terms of the future. A number of locations actually, downsizing the locations, also looking at system implementation, and also ensuring that again you've got the right balance between external support and internal expertise. I think the risk of not getting it right at the beginning sort of, cascades down to the success or the, not so much failure, but the delay or deferment of project milestones. And that's very critical. You've got to ensure that you've got the right plan, right people in place, and the right transformation activity internally, as well as with the support for external stakeholders.
Yeah. And do you think in that sort of turnaround, the CFO is the right person to be leading it?
It's a very good question. I think the CFO is absolutely the right person to be involved at the sort of, leadership level. But I've seen a situation where it's been led by the CEO.
Yeah.
And I've also seen a situation where it's been led by an external party.
Yeah.
So the answer to that question is probably depends on the circumstances that the requirement is basically validated by the business. Obviously, finance will be heavily involved either way, and obviously, as the leader of finance, CFO, the FD, or head of finance, depending on the type of organisation, will be absolutely key to work alongside colleagues and external parties to deliver the outcomes.
Yeah, and the reason I ask, Baz, is that my last permanent employer, before going as an independent consultant, we effectively went through one of those sorts of transformations, and well, the transformation failed.
Oh, really?
Mainly, we were in an extreme set of circumstances. The company that I worked for originally, I joined having left PwC when IBM took over the consulting business. I followed the head of UK consulting into a small consultancy as employee number 60. The aim was always to have a transformational event, a business sale or a flotation and so on. And we got there. The guy, the CEO, took us to that point, and we were bought by an outsourcing business. They'd started off as a construction business. They'd become project management, more and more into consultancy, more and more into outsourcing. Essentially, they really only had one customer. And that one customer was UK government. Now, we came into not long after they bought us, and the government at the time was having great difficulty through the financial crisis, having to bail banks out and so on and so forth. General election 2010.
Yeah.
Suddenly, we've got the coalition coming in, and we went into austerity. Well, that's not a very good place for an outsourcing business and a project management business. And 50% of our business was, the client was the highways agency. We were managing road programs, things like that. Suddenly, highways agencies stopped spending money overnight. Lots of bits of government stopped spending money. And we were the consulting bit. I ended up being seconded internally to work directly for our strategy director, who was running the transformation, which was basically saying, how the hell do we turn this business around? We've got to somehow manage to lose cost as quickly as we're losing revenue, or we're going to be in a mess. There's nothing we can do about revenue because our only customer isn't spending any money. The CFO was heavily involved in talking to banks, talking to debtors, things like that, trying just to hang the cash flow together, and didn't have time really to get involved in the transformation. So we started having done all the easy stuff, which was, well, people that are chargeable to projects no longer have a project, you get rid. That's the simple stuff. The harder stuff was then saying, wait a minute, we've got a company that's grown by acquisition, has never ever rationalized businesses. We've got 10 back offices where we actually need one. So we started doing shared services projects and things like that, just really to chuck extra cost out of the overhead as quickly as we could. And yeah, it was the strategy director that was effectively leading it, because the CFO was just plain too busy trying to keep the company afloat.
Do you think so what you're saying, from I understand it, is that the economic factors absolutely overwhelmed the sort of transformational activity, or it's funny you should say that. And I don't know, it really, a similar story around the same time with myself, akin to what you described. I experienced my first, because I've had two instances of winding up an organization, which was obviously sad in terms of the people and the sort of the personal side of having colleagues who obviously were told at a certain stage that unfortunately the company no longer had funds to continue. That was a business that I worked for around the same time, which was also affected by around the 2010, some of the, following the credit crunch, some of the recessionary measures, lack of funding, and it was pretty much funded by a single benefactor, and it was a pretty traumatic time in terms of the company, with just in terms of an exit plan. The business did have an exit plan, like you were describing. A similar story to yours. I think what I didn't appreciate until 2, 3, 4 years after that, it just teaches you a different side of business. In terms of, at the time, it was quite traumatic personally as well as professionally, because you feel as you're a finance director, you feel like you failed in your role, but it also teaches you a lot of lessons about character building, some of that softer stuff, but actually it's quite hard. It's hard skills as well, character building, and how to manage the cash flow, and how to see. We couldn't refund it, because in terms of going out there and seeking funding, because we would have been on the edge of trading insolvently, and as you well know, I'm sure you've been a director of many companies. That's not something you don't know to consider. We called in the insolvency practitioners at the right time, and I worked with them to ensure that we could extract as much funding as possible for the individuals in the company to get paid. And I had a similar instance where I went into a company a couple of years after that, more of an interim FD role, where it was really flagging, and it was at the time, again, 2010, 2011, where the property market was struggling, and when I looked at this company's books, initially there was no way that it should survive, but we did some deals with suppliers. We had a CVA, creditor's voluntary arrangement, and we managed, with the help of professional parties, myself and the directors managed to sell it off, and it was a big success, and that company is still going strong today. So it's you've got the two ends of the spectrum there, in terms of how both companies were in transition in terms of trying to grow, but how external factors affect what's going on in the company. And actually,
I think back to my experience at that time, Baz, and think, well, actually, at any point in my career, over those probably 6-12 months we were trying to turn the business around, I probably learned more over those 12 months than possibly any other 12 months in my career. And I was in that nice position of not being the CFO, finance director, therefore not having to worry about how much is in the bank, how the hell are we going to pay these bills, how are we going to meet payroll next month. But being effectively the right-hand finance guy for the strategy director. And John and I had some fantastic fun going into hard-nosed zero-based budgeting sessions. It wasn't the budget round, but effectively we went in there with every budget holder in the back office and said, okay, take me through your budget line by line. I don't want to know what the amounts are by the headings in the general ledger. I want to know what you are actually spending that money on, want to know really what it's doing. So we went through the marketing budget, we went through the publicity budget, we went through the HR budget. And now I was playing the role of, come on, tell me what the number is. Explain to me what that's £5,000 is for, or that £10,000. And so I was playing good cop. John was playing bad cop.
Yeah.
And just, yeah, okay, you can't have that anymore.
Yeah.
And starting that argument off for somebody to tell you it was an absolutely essential line. I mean, we canned, in one of those sessions, we canned the whole graduate recruitment scheme.
Yeah.
And we had a big grad recruitment program. We'd take 100, 150 grads every year. And we just drew a red line through it in 1 2-hour meeting.
Unfortunately, do they call it? I suppose they call it discretionary spend that gets the chop in the first instance.
As we went further down the road as well, we started looking at the property portfolio. Mm-hmm. And we got a property guy alongside us who was also part of the consulting practice and normally did property reviews for clients. But basically, Alan and I went through the property portfolio and saying, well, hang on a minute, we've got office there, we've got another one that's only 20 miles away. Now we've got rid of people, so they're both only half full. Right. Okay, Alan, work out which one's the best one to get rid of. And my role ended up being, we had all of these plans in place to stop spending money. And I then became the bad cop that went around sort of 3 months after we'd had the review meeting, looking at the actual spend. And it was kind of, okay, tell me why you're still spending money there. Thought we agreed 3 months ago, that was out of the window. And it was all the sub stories. Well, we didn't quite get around to giving the 3 months notice to that person in the right time, and actually the first piece of experience of doing the zero-based budgeting piece, but then the bit afterwards of actually making sure what you'd agreed was followed through on was very, very interesting. But that sad day came when John pulled the transformation team into his office one by one, and it was, sorry guys, we've done a hell of a lot here, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to let you all go.
Wow. Yeah, very sad day. And like I said, it's sad days are when you have to get up in front of your whole staff base and say, unfortunately, we're calling the insolvency practitioner in tomorrow.
Yep.
Because our funding is no longer available and we haven't got enough time to go to do the rounds, so to speak.
Yes.
That's what people call it. But coming back to your transformation discussion, I think where I've seen business transformation, finance transformation projects that I've worked on or led or jointly led, the most successful ones are the ones where don't try and take on the whole world and change everything.
Agree.
The smallest differences. It's all about making the smallest differences and allowing, colleagues, stakeholders, whether external or internal, to understand that small difference will add value in some respects, somewhere down the line. And sometimes it does mean, it involves some restructuring or, like you said, looking at the granular side of costs and ensuring that you make some tough decisions. And, I don't know a business that I've worked for or, similar peers working for businesses they work for where that's not the case. You go into finance roles and people are always a little bit skeptical about, well, what's the new guy going to do?
Yeah.
And actually, at the end of the day, you just want to do the best for the company, add some value. And by the time you've leave it in a better state than when you joined. I mean, that's always one thing that I always try to strive for. Have I left a role in a better position than when I joined it?
Yeah.
Hand on heart, I'd say most times I have. Yeah.
So Baz, as sort of accountants, finance guys, to us sometimes it's all about the numbers, but it's really all about the people. So what about taking those people on a journey with you? What's your advice on that one?
That's probably the hardest part of it, because you've got to use you know, all your soft skills, all your leadership skills, and all your, you know, it's not about spreadsheets and systems and implementation.
And all that stuff you never learned.
Yeah, it's about
exams, isn't it?
I've got three, let's call them values, that I abide by in terms of how to bring along a team to basically understand what I'm trying to do in a leadership finance role. Not necessarily all the time agree, but understand. And those three things, there are honesty, you know, be transparent with people, communicate, and then communicate some more, and then communicate again.
Yeah, and
especially
management is when you think you've communicated enough, you haven't, do it again.
Yes. I think I also heard you say that the other day on one of the podcasts, so I thought I'd copy it straight out of your book. And actually, in the last year, that's been extra tough, I'm sure, for a lot of people. And you know, even before I left the Sodexo role, and is to say, the thing that we've lost most in this isolated period is the fact that, you know, human beings are tactile. You know, we shake hands, or, you know, sometimes we hug colleagues and we celebrate, and you know, we've lost that, and it's been harder to communicate. You know, we can only communicating like this on a podcast, which is great, but you know, the face to face, nothing beats face to face.
I know, and you can have those formal meetings, but there's no real replacement for you know, that chat at the coffee machine when it's
exactly.
How's it going, Steve?
You hear something in the corridor, you see something where there's an interaction between a couple of people, there's laughter, there's smiling, you know, those things that I think, you know, everyone I speak to misses the most. And so honesty, communication, and the last one, probably the most important, clarity. What are we trying to actually achieve?
Yeah.
And it's not just about, you know, just what we're trying to grow to a certain level of percentage or a certain turnover level. What are we trying to achieve for the organization? You know, a great quote from Steve Jobs, not so much a quote, but a philosophy where I think he used to say, it was never about Apple being number one. It was about Apple giving to its consumers what they wanted or what they should have.
Yes.
Number one comes after that, because if
number one's a function of getting the relationship with the customers right. Yes.
You hear most companies in the financial press, it's all about growth and being number one. But actually, that, in my book, and I hope I'm not using this as a derogatory statement for my future career, but actually, if your customers are happy, number one will come. Or number two. Number two is good.
So, Baz, that has been a fantastic canter through the world of transforming a business when you arrive. And if you're out there with a business that needs transforming and needs a CFO to take you through it, well, by strange coincidence, Baz is available to join you at the moment. So please give him a call or find him on LinkedIn. And if you want to find out a whole load more about soft skills and so on, there's loads and loads of that inside Grow CFO, within the Future CFO program, within the Finance Leader program. So yeah, today, thank you, Baz. That has been a great conversation.
Thank you very much, Kevin, and thanks for having me on. It's been a real pleasure.